Hey everyone, joining us on Facebook Live. I want to welcome you to the podcast, Lust is Boring. We've got a tremendous show lined up for you today with author Kelsey Skoch, who wrote this fantastic book called Uncompromising Purity. It's not just a guy problem. So she's going to be on the show in a few moments here, but first wanted to do a shout out to our first sponsor we've now gotten for the program, Hallow. If you're not familiar with Hallow, this is actually the #1 Catholic app in the United States App Store. So I've been using this for a long time. What it is, it's a prayer app where you've got morning prayers. If you're having trouble falling asleep at night, they've got, different people like Father Michael Schmitz, or for example, the man who played Jesus in the Chosen movie, him reading the Beatitudes to you if you're having trouble falling asleep. Rosaries. So you're driving the kids to school or just distracted in the car, you just click a button, play a rosary. And you might, I don't have 25 minutes. Well, pick the 15-minute version of the rosary to pray on the way to work. It's just an incredible prayer app, something to listen to. Because, you and I know there's so much junk available for our screens today. It is an unprecedented level of garbage, but there's also an unprecedented level of incredible graces that are accessible through that screen. And I think it's because of stuff like Hallow. I kind of think of them as kind of an oasis in the midst of this digital desert. And so I just want to encourage you to try it out for free. There's a link here in the show notes and on Facebook Live on the comment. You just go to hallow.com/lustisboring. You get to try this thing out for 14 days for free. Give it a shot. It is awesome. It is going to sanctify so many parts of your day that could be wasted on a screen, and instead you lift your hearts and minds to God. So that's something to check out. Another thing just for you ladies, we have just released our first ebook that's going to be available. It's a quick little ebook. Years ago, my wife and I came out with a book called How to Find Your Soulmate Without Losing Your Soul. First chapter of that book is the top 10 guys to avoid. And that ended up being a pretty popular chapter, unfortunately. In fact, I remember speaking in a co-ed high school a while ago, and some girls decided to make posters of the top 10 guys to avoid and plaster them all over the hallways of the school, kind of like public service announcements for the young ladies there of what to avoid. So we just turned it into an awesome ebook of this first chapter and amended it a little bit just so we can get this out to more people than ever. And so I want you to download this free ebook, share it with your friends, please. You just go to chastity.com/10 guys. That's right, the number 10, 10 guys. It's a free ebook. Pass that thing on to your friend, because so much about finding authentic love, I think, is about avoiding the counterfeit. It is so much easier to break off a dead-end relationship before it even begins, as opposed to trying to break it off when you're 6 months or 2 years in. And so, for one, try the new Hallow app. Secondly, get this new ebook, Top 10 Guys You're Better Off Without. Just go to chastity.com/10 guys and share that with your friends. Now, speaking of there being a lot of junk available through our screens, there has been a predominant stereotype that this is really just kind of a guy issue, right? Guys struggle with lust, girls emotional stuff, modesty, whatever. And for years, this kind of stereotype has made a lot of women feel kind of isolated, left out, alienated. Well, wait a minute, this is a struggle I have too. Lust isn't just a guy problem, but nobody was speaking out about this. Nobody was talking about this until our guest today, Kelsey Skoch, author of this incredible book on uncompromising purity. It's not just a guy problem. I want to welcome Kelsey to the show. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
Man, it is a blessing. We were talking just before the show, speaking of all the junk that's available online. Netflix has been offering an unprecedented amount of garbage lately. For those of our listeners and viewers who might not be in the loop on this, can you give them a heads up as to what kind of junk they're spewing out?
Well, yeah, I thought this was just very providential in timing because the movie Cuties came out recently, and there's just been a lot of traction in terms of people viewing it and then people being horrified by what it is, which if you're not familiar with the movie, is essentially in the name of we're trying to keep people from knowing that they want people to know the dangers of young girls around 11 years old watching these over-sexualized videos, dancing, content, whatever, and then how that affects them, and then they in turn start doing it themselves. But they decide to use this movie also in a way of becoming what they're trying to warn you against. So these young women at 11 years old are doing provocative, very scandalous dance moves on screen, which in turn is directly against their so-called, purpose of it. So it's just interesting that it is, pedophilia content that they have allowed to be distributed for all of their subscribers without any type of retribution, legally as per se. But it's just fascinating it's no longer gonna be rare. That's actually just, I think, what we're gonna continue to see on all major streaming devices and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you want to vomit. I mean, I had seen someone post it on Facebook, like, hey, cancel Netflix because of this thing. And, I clicked on it and saw about 3 seconds of the video of what they are depicting these 11-year-old girls doing. I mean, I just wanted to vomit on my MacBook seeing this and telling people, okay, we're going to show you how bad it is. So you don't get into it. That's like saying, it's really bad to eat sewage. So we're going to just have a buffet of manure and just invite everybody in to munch on down so you can learn how horrible this is for your diet. It's like, you got to be kidding me. So everybody watch us, join us. Crystalina and I just canceled Netflix ourselves. We don't need that filth in the house. Much better alternative. You could use VidAngel, and there's lots of awesome stuff on there. Pure Flix. There's a lot of great stuff to get good content. So let's unplug the junk. Because look, these companies, they only speak one language, and it's money. That's the only thing they understand. They're not trying to create content to send souls to hell. They just want money. That's all they understand. And so as messed up as it is, we don't watch what they show us. They show us what people watch. And the very fact that there would even be a demand for this is so disturbing. We've got to send a loud and clear message. We're not going to let girls get degraded like this. And hopefully if we can learn not to degrade girls, we might even learn not to degrade women in general. It's not like, okay, she's 16, green light, 18, now we can start degrading them. The more adult they are, the lower we can bring them. I don't think so, but we got to at least start somewhere. So glad you're on the same page with that one. But yeah, now in terms of your story and everything, I know we've had you on the program before on Facebook Live. Tell the viewers, listeners, your story and why God has kind of put this mission upon your heart to reach women with this message. Yeah,
so like so many women, which we'll hear stories similar to mine, when I was 12 years old, I was innocently scrolling through channels on television and encountered a series of movies that demonstrated kind of what this movie was trying to demonstrate in a terrible way, but demonstrated very sexually explicit content on primetime television. And it was essentially the first exposure I had to pornography and masturbation, which is what we'll be talking about today. And I'd never really been exposed. I think right now the average age of exposure is between 8 and 11 years old. So, and that's, 12, when I was 12 years old, that was almost 18 years ago. Kind of crazy to think about. But so I was exposed at 12 years old, and I wouldn't have said all of a sudden now I had a heavy addiction to pornography and masturbation, but it started very slowly. I think from watching this movie, it got me intrigued. And so I decided to test out the behavior and see what all the hype was about. And throughout high school, I noticed that it calmed me down anytime where I was stressed or there was some type of emotional issue with friends or family. This was a great way to escape. And so what I initially just thought was innocent, my own choice. I'm taking control of my life and I'm using a healthy outlet. Slowly began to take control of my life. And, I got back into my faith at the end of high school, and I had heard all the chastity talks, and I'd known, okay, sex before marriage, I see how that's, attaching yourself to a person and how that can be harmful. But, pornography and masturbation, you're not really hurting anyone else. That's a very personal thing that's happening here. So it wasn't until the end of college, so now, almost 8 to 10 years into my addiction, where I got really involved in my faith, and I learned a little bit more of church teaching, and I still didn't agree, right? I still thought the church had it wrong. And so it wasn't until then when I decided to test it again, in the sense of, if I can give this up, then I can prove I'm not addicted. If it's easy to do, because what I learned was essentially that if anything is in control of you, aka like you put it before God, then it is obviously not good for you. It's something that you put in place of him. And so I thought, if I could give it up, then that proved the church was wrong, which, if anyone knows, trying to prove the church wrong, it's just a fool's game.
Good luck with that.
So So I attempted, and let's to put it shortly, I failed. And in that experience, I just realized how much it had controlled my life and had become all consuming. And so I started a journey to become free. And at the time, I tried to find resources, especially for women, and I couldn't find anything. Anything I could find was specifically for men, different programs. I mean, they had the whole 9 yards. There was books, there was videos, there was just everything you could name it. And throughout this journey, I also felt called to become a missionary with an organization. And so I joined that organization, Focus, and similar things in terms of content and resources available for men, but not yet for women, because you saw this everywhere. And so it was my third year as a missionary where I decided to basically put my name out there for any female missionary to contact me if this is something that they struggled with personally, or maybe a student and needed some help. And I thought maybe I'd get a couple names, but so that was 6 years ago. And from the moment my name went out there, the flood of contacts, people reaching out to me, I just began to start mentoring and counseling a lot of these women with no credentials myself, but just experience in struggling with this and breaking free. And so for 6 years, I've just been working with women. Now it's pretty much my full-time gig, putting this book together, but really helping women who feel like they are the only ones, that they're completely alone in these addictions or these struggles, thinking that they aren't feminine, how they sin, or thinking that they're just unworthy of love because of this issue. And I've learned, it falls into a whole gambit of other addictions and other just ideas of sexuality that women have been taught through our world and our culture, that I'm even more, falling in love with teaching and talking to women about. So that's a little bit of my story and how I've gotten into it.
No, I remember when I was in high school, we went on a high school retreat, and the boys go into one cabin and the girls went to the other. And, right away, the youth leaders went into masturbation, pornography with the guys, and the girls just had like 30 tissue boxes, to work through. And they just talked about relationships and emotions, but like being the girl in that room when the topic is not being discussed, like, as you said, I remember you saying once, and you just alluded to it, that a woman said, like, I don't even sin in a feminine way. What does that do to a woman's heart when she thinks like there's something double wrong with her? It's just like, this shouldn't be happening to me. I'm just this freak of nature. What does she do with all those emotions? You just kind of bury them, escape, and go back into this cycle of isolation, I imagine?
Definitely. The amount of shame surrounding this, particularly for women, is astonishing. And I think it has kept women from seeking the healing they deserve. From going to confession and actually receiving the spiritual healing. But then for them to share with friends or have any type of accountability, I think that's one of the biggest obstacles now that I'm seeing is women are finally saying, you're right, this is an issue. I don't want this a part of my life anymore. But then there aren't the resources available. So then they feel like, well, I'm kind of stuck in it because there's nothing out there for me to help me anyway. It's just become a cyclical issue, I think.
Now, for a woman, how would you say, because I think for too long we've just kind of treated women like guys, like, okay, this is how we're struggling, so you're probably struggling the same way, kind of a cookie cutter approach. What would be distinct, and that's what I liked about what you did in the book, is recognizing that a woman's temptations are different than a man's, her triggers are different than a man's, and the kind of pastoral solutions needed for a feminine heart is different than a man's. And so just start with maybe temptations. Like, how would the temptations of a woman, for the most part, be distinct from those of a guy? And yeah, obviously there's going to be some commonality, but I think in what ways would you find that women are uniquely tempted?
Definitely. So like you said, the basic ones, stress, exhaustion, insecurity, for all addictions kind of is similar for women. Insecurities is a little unique because women have different types of insecurities. But the number one trigger, which is so important for women to know, is our hormonal cycles. This is something that men don't have to worry about, is that for women, our desire for sexuality or our sexual relations is determined on our hormonal cycle. So when we're in a week of ovulation, so you ovulate on one day as a woman, but there's a period of time surrounding that one day where our desires biologically are heightened to desire sex. And that is just unique for a woman because if you're fighting this temptation, this is a struggle of yours, I work with so many women and they're like, Kelsey, I finally have broken free, but I just can't get over that once a month hurdle, just once a month. I'm like, you don't say. Have you started tracking your cycle? Have you started to look into these things biologically? And sure enough, it always lines up with what's going on here. And so there are chemical things that could be causing extra temptation and triggers, which is not to be, throw your hands in the air. Well, shoot, now I have even more obstacles. But actually use that knowledge and use our bodies as a gift and a good thing to seek healthier alternatives during those times, because essentially what your body is desiring is intimacy with another, which doesn't have to be sex. There are many ways that we can share in intimacy emotionally and make those connections with friends to kind of help offset that kind of temptation.
Okay, so if a woman is in that phase of the cycle and the estrogen is starting to climb up and leading up to ovulation and she's mindful, okay, that time of the month, this is going to get a little bit more tempting. It's going to get a little more tough. What are some things practically? You had started to mention some accountability. What are some things that she can do as that time of the month is approaching to resist, the temptations? Because I had read recently that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is human connection and intimacy. That's what's needed to fill the void that we're often just dumping all the addiction into to try to fill us up. So as a woman, at that time of the month, the estrogen amount is climbing up. What does she do at that time to kind of, okay, this is going to get a little tough, and here's how I'm going to prepare myself for the temptations coming up?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I always talk about pornography and masturbation are symptoms of a deeper desire in our hearts. And like you said, I think for many years it was much more self-mastery, just grit your teeth, get over your temptations. But rather it is connection, it is relationship that we are seeking when we're seeking these things. And so that's exactly the antidote, if you will. During these times of greater temptation, and if you know that that's in your cycle and that's a big trigger for you, kind of as I was mentioning, schedule friend dates, going out to lunch more often, working out more, physical activity to kind of get some of that energy out physically can also be really helpful. So if you're not big on a gym, or with COVID, it's not possible, like going for a walk. I mean, it doesn't have to be pumping steel, but you can do active things. Scheduling phone calls with long distance friends or game nights, things like that, where you're not just in a room watching a movie in the dark, kind of turning yourself off with friends, but engaging conversation, sharing your heart, because, feeling known is really helpful to make those connections that we're talking about here. So yeah, those would be some initial things I'd say is you can start planning fun, exciting things with other people during those times that you might have greater temptation.
Now, this may seem like a loaded question, but what's a woman looking for, when she goes down that path, whether it's an audio thing, whether it's a visual, whether it's a book she's reading. Do you think there's some things uniquely that a woman is seeking deep down, more than just the potential arousal, the sensuality of the images for a few moments? Do you think there's some unique things that the feminine heart is longing for that if a woman understood, like, this is what I'm really after? You're pointing out human intimacy and things like that. When a woman clicks, when a woman listens or reads that type of a book, what do you think it is that the feminine soul is aching for at the deepest level?
Well, it's interesting. I would say it is similar to men in the sense that we're all seeking relationship. And I often talk, through my book and when I give talks, is there is an innate identity of who we are as men and women that comes from God himself, right? You look at Genesis, you look at God saying that man is made in the image and likeness of God. And looking at what does that mean? What is the image and likeness of God? Because if we're made in that image, that must be important. And looking at God himself is a relational being. He's three persons in one. And that's really important for us because man and woman are all made for relationship, which ultimately is fulfilled only through our Creator. So most often this desire for sex, for pornography, masturbation, if it's in this disordered way, is a desire to get to the highest level of relationship, which is through God. But our earthly, distortion of that makes you think you can grasp at it in these lesser ways that will be unfulfilling. But as a woman, I think our desire as a daughter of God to be beloved and to have that unity with our Father gets broken down in many different ways that our world has kind of almost elevated us for the perfect setup. You know, the way that we're taught that we should desire, you know, men and relationships is from our own beauty, is that we are supposed to be the ones attracting the male, that in order to be worthy of love and a good relationship, we have to start with who we are, which is completely opposite of what God says, right? Like God is the pursuer, but he never says, come to me. He's the one coming to us every step of the way. And I think women just desire and ache for the desire to be known and to be pursued and to have that. And so I think these addictions, these falls, essentially are just a way for us to escape that's like, this is what it is, because every woman's story is going to be different. But I often have seen a trend of women saying, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, saying that this is a way for them to forget all of those feelings of inadequacy, of alone, like loneliness that they're feeling. And for just a moment, they can feel, loved, desired, and like they're not alone. And so I think our desire as a woman is to be fulfilled, and it can only be through God. And so I don't know if that perfectly answers your question, but I think the woman heart definitely desires all of those things.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought of it before you mentioned that, but it seems like there's almost a puzzle piece connection between the male porn problem preceding that of the female. Because if what the woman is really longing for is to be enough, to be pursued, to be captivating to the heart of a man, and he's a porn addict, or you have a culture of pornified men who've basically grown up with this garbage on their cell phones since they've been in 7th grade, and they're not pursuing anybody. And it's not because the woman's not attractive enough, because that's what I think what the girls fall into is, well, I've got to be skinnier and I've got to be smaller here and bigger there and all that stuff, and then I'm going to captivate the guy. But I mean, it's not that there's something lacking in her, because look, guys aren't faithful to one porn website or porn model. It just trains them in this mental polygamy. And in the man's brain, it's like, well, if I can get instant access to thousands of flawless supermodels who have no demands, no emotional needs, who will never deny me, who will never reject me, who are constantly sexually available, physically flawless, and when I'm done with them, I just leave. I remember who it was that said, when a man, I think it was G.K. Chesterton or C.S. Lewis, that said, when a man goes to a prostitute, he's not paying her for sex, he's paying her to leave. And it's like, whoa, he's not paying her for sex, he's paying her to leave. And in a sense, that's what pornography is. You're investing in this so she'll leave, so that she's accessible when you want, and then you just discard her. And when you've got guys just that have grown up on this pornified culture, and then they turn 17 years old, they're not asking anybody to homecoming. What? Risk rejection? I have to listen to her? She's got emotional needs? Ugh. I mean, the demands, way too much. No thanks. Back to some porn on Instagram. And so if the guys are getting emasculated through the porn, they're no longer initiating that kind of gift of life-giving love. They're no longer risking. Then the girls think, oh, well, I must be the problem. It's because I'm not skinny enough. It's because I'm not sexually available enough that maybe I just need to throw myself out there more. And girls start, I think even out of curiosity, looking at porn. Like, okay, now what do I need to look like? And what do I need to do? And who do I need to be? But I always tell the women, like, you were never created to be porn. You were created to be loved. And so I think so much of this is kind of, now that I'm thinking through it, just kind of coming from a culture of pornified guys. They're not pursuing. Girls think they're the problem. And now they're aching more than anything to be pursued. And in the absence of someone saying you are captivating, they're finding some semblance of human connection through the porn and this and that. So let's say you've got a girl there. Let's say she's in college, she's got some good friends, and who knows, maybe they struggle with it too, but as far as she knows, she's the only person on this campus of 20,000 women who's wrestling with this right now. What does she do? Obviously accountability is important, but how do you put that first piece of accountability into place? How does a girl break out of the isolation?
Yep, and I'll definitely hit that. I want to go back to something you were sharing earlier about the women's brain of, the men who are having this pornographic problem, and then it kind of turns to women. I would say we've moved even slightly past that point to the culture is now teaching women that we can be sexually sufficient by ourselves, that we actually don't need men as well. And so I would say there's a culture of women saying that I don't need a man to be fulfilled. I don't need a man to be, to seek pleasure, whatever. And so I would say that we've now kind of met where the guys are at. If guys are not pursuing us, if guys are not risking it, if they're not actually being the men that they were created to be, it is created a culture of women who also doesn't need it, has just decided we're going to be good on our own. So as you were sharing that, just made me just want to emphasize that there is what I'm hearing from a lot of women, and what I myself felt was that you kind of have to take it into your own hands. We're seeing this with video games and women kind of just thinking that they need to control their whole life, that it's kind of grown into that as well. But what you're sharing about accountability, for whatever reason, if this is something that you've struggled with, or if you know a woman who's struggling with this, in terms of accountability, the most important thing is being able to share your experience with someone, obviously a priest, but also a girlfriend. So someone of the same sex that you can actually talk about this with, because it's so amazing the power that this can have over someone when it's under the rug, when it's completely hidden. It has this power over you that it doesn't deserve. And so just by naming it and telling someone else, another soul in the world who knows this is something that you're battling, honestly will begin to help you feel free, just in the slightest of ways. But just knowing that you're not alone in this, which again is a trigger, helps you in freedom. So sharing with someone, and what that looks like, because this is the most mortifying thing. I tell women all over the world about this, and they're like, I wish you could ask me to do anything but that, right? Like that's like the one thing I can't do. And so just starting a conversation, and start with the world's problem. But like, hey, I heard this talk. Maybe it's this podcast, or I was listening to a speaker, and they were talking about the issue of pornography in our culture, and that not only men are struggling with this, but women too. And it made me realize just that this is a part of my story. That I have an addiction to pornography, masturbation, whatever it is. And I need to talk to someone about this. And I want you to know that I'm terrified to share this with you. And I really hope you don't judge me in this. They won't, by the way. But I really hope you don't judge me. Saying the words, just speak the lies that you're trying not to believe. I really hope you don't judge me, but I really need someone to help me. And I kid you not, I get so many requests. I do almost all my messaging through Instagram for this ministry. And I get so many women who are like, hey, I'm like meeting with someone, I'm going to be their accountability, or I'm going to ask them for accountability. What do I do? And then I don't get to it because I'm not glued to it. And the next day they're like, okay, never mind. I told them, and it turns out that they struggle with it too. Like, we're good. But I often tell them they don't need to struggle with this for this still to be an option as an accountability partner, because there's something else that they struggle with too. There's something else going through, whether it's a social media addiction or a shopping habit, or even an eating disorder or desire to, like they call it disordered eating. Doesn't necessarily mean you have an eating disorder, but there could be an addiction there. So just figuring out what maybe they could be struggling with, and then as a sisterhood of women working together to keep each other free of these things. So I can go into more specifics, but in terms of the initial reach out, it's just being vulnerable, sharing with one person you trust that you can confide in, and being honest with your struggle.
So let's say, she tells someone on campus, hey, I've really been wrestling with this, and the other person confides back, hey, me too. Now they've, in a sense, both become accountability partners. So this person was expected to get one, and now she's expected to be one. If you are on the receiving end of this news, what can you actually do for that person? Like, what role can you play in their life to help them overcome that? Because maybe it's not porn, maybe it's masturbation, one or the other. What can you do on a day-to-day basis without prying too much, and getting too nosy, but in the same respect, letting them know that you're there for them? What can you do as an accountability partner for them?
I'd say at the very minimum, once a week, reaching out and saying, hey, how are you doing with this issue? With pornography, with masturbation, how did this week go? As the person who's receiving that, if you are the accountability reaching out, talking with them about their experience. I mean, if this is something they've just recently been exposed to and are working on, it's going to be very different than a friend who says, I've been doing this for 12 years. So that might change. If it is pornography, I highly recommend, Covenant Eyes Custodio I'm a huge fan of, just an internet filter where you can actually be the person on the other side of the internet filter who has complete access to what they're viewing. I mean, that's a great way to be an accountability partner in this. But then what you'd ask of the person who's struggling with this is that at every moment of temptation that they reach out to you as an accountability partner. And I'm not talking like every time you fall into this. I'm saying every time there's a trigger. So if you're stressed, if you notice every time you have a stressful conversation with your mom, that's when you fall into this. Like you have a stressful conversation with your mom, you're calling your accountability partner. You watch a movie and it has a graphic scene that you weren't expecting. You call your accountability partner, because if you just say, oh no, it's fine. It was fine. I'm not thinking of anything. I'm good now. Well, in 24 hours, you might be. And so just naming it and calling it out to your accountability partner, praying with them right then and there for healing of that memory or that experience or whatever it is. So that way you're not just, hey, I fell, let's go to confession. It becomes a routine that isn't helpful for either person. And so allowing them to be there when it's hard would be some initial steps.
And I would imagine when it comes to picking an accountability partner, trying to find someone who has overcome the struggle or isn't experiencing the struggle. Because I'd imagine if you're using the accountability software program and they get in a report of the websites you've been visiting, and then they're like, oh, I haven't seen that one yet, and click on there. So I imagine to find such a person, I imagine if it's someone living at home, hey, try to get your parents. If not, maybe a campus minister, maybe a focused missionary, if you've got one on your university campus. But I'd imagine it's probably helpful best to find someone who's kind of gone through that. So that way you're not like two lifeguards who don't know how to swim and you're both jumping into the pool to save each other, and you're both going down together.
Brick to brick, so. Like you take the brick, now you take the brick. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, we got some questions that have come in from some of the people who support the program on Patreon, and I want to bounce some of their questions off of you. This woman asked, first off, Kelsey, thank you for your ministry. I myself was trapped in believing I was the only woman who dealt with this, and you writing a book about this has helped me and so many other women. A couple questions from her. One, if there wasn't some sort of benefit in these behaviors, we wouldn't engage in them, like most sins, but there is. I know the reason why it's not good for me to masturbate or watch pornography, but you can't deny the feelings during it are great. God gave it to us to be that way. Suggestions, please, on getting past that feeling that I'm doing it because it feels good, even though I know it's not good for me. Too much knowledge can sometimes be a problem too, I feel.
Well, it's good that they know that it's good, right? I never want to be the person sex is bad, because it's not. It is God created, and it's a beautiful thing. But it's interesting. It's so funny how our brains do this, because I totally have been there as well. But there are a lot of things that feel good that aren't good for us, and that because of those reasons, we don't engage in them. So you think about, hardcore drugs, so heroin, cocaine, things like that. They have initial positive benefits to the user, which is why people use it, but long-term, very detrimental effects. You can even look at junk food, really great in the moment, but if all you ate was junk food over and over again, there would be some long-term harmful effects. And I think a lot of times, if you were to ever look at someone who has cancer, and I think Matt Fradd uses this analogy, but if you were to look at someone who has cancer, like what wouldn't the person do to get rid of the cancer, right? Like they would go to all the extremes, the testing, the medical research facilities, whatever, to be able to get rid of this ailment. And so it's hard, because you'd have to ask the question, we say we know the reasons why this is harmful, but I would go back to that person and go, do you really? Like, have you read the studies and reports that show how detrimental this is to your current and future relationships? I think you were the person who said it's like shooting your future marriage in the head or something.
Yeah.
And it couldn't be more true. And you look at it from the male perspective and the woman perspective, your sexual functionality is affected by this. It's a physical response to an addiction like this. So it's not just an emotional damaging or, something that's hidden, because I think that's what we often assume, like, okay, well, yeah, it's damaging, but at least in the immediate, it's good. I think we really need to see how damaging this is to people and their relationships. And so I would first off recommend going to those studies. I know Covenant Eyes has a great resource tab that has statistics, just study after study that goes and lists the statistics that you can see. Fight the New Drug has great resources and articles as well. There are resources out there. I have on my website, kelseyskoch.com/purity, and I just have a whole page of just resources to click. And so do more research to reconfirm to yourself, this is harmful. And then I think looking at the harms of what this can do, recognize sex is good. And that's what is the God-given gift. This is a distortion of that. And so while it might feel good to your body, it's a lie. And I think that's where we have to really recognize the false impersonator that's in front of us, and then start to remove that from our life. If we start to see this as, oh, it's sex, and so it's a beautiful gift, it's good, that's not what we're talking about here. And it's easy to blur them because we want to justify it in our addiction, but it's not the case.
And I'll let our viewers, listeners know we're going to take Kelsey's link that she had just mentioned, and we'll put it in the show notes so you can click on that and see all the different resources that she's recommending. I was watching a talk yesterday from a friend of mine who works with Exodus 90. He submitted a video for something that we're creating for guys right now called Forge. It's going to be a 33-day program for guys to break free from porn. It's going to be a book as well as 33 days of videos they're going to get. And Nathan, he submitted his video, and there's a line in there that he said that, we're all pretty much aware that the body can be a source of pleasure. We all kind of figure that out at some point in life. But he said, there reaches a point in spiritual maturity where you discover that the body is not just a source of pleasure. The body can be a source of sanctification, that you can use your body to pray through fasting. Instead of doing something good that is bad, that feels good but is bad, he said you could do something that kind of feels a little bad, fasting, but it brings about something good. And so they say gluttony is the forerunner of impurity. That first comes gluttony, this inability to say no to the little pleasures. Well, yeah, that Cinnabon over there looks pretty darn good. If I can't say no to that, good luck saying no to porn websites and everything else. So maybe one way to kind of counteract this weakness of the flesh is by doing something that isn't pleasurable to the body, that brings about grace through fasting. Not only does it make you more spiritually, I think, aware and acute throughout the day, it's a source of redemptive suffering. That fasting you can offer up as a prayer. So, let's say you're in church and you get a flashback of some pornographic image that you saw or that popped up on your phone from 2 months ago, and now it's rattling around in your brain while you're going up for communion. How do you process that? Well, hey, let's pray for that person right now. And so likewise, we could take a Friday and skip a meal or 2 or 3, have bread and water, and offer up that fast for our temptation. So that way we're using our body as kind of a weapon. And instead of us falling through the body, God is elevating us in and through it. Now, got another question from her. She asked, Kelsey, women are turned on so much through their senses, especially what they hear. In my most recent struggles, I have been using audio porn to masturbate. It can seem less harmful than regular porn, but it's not. Suggestions or recommendations for overcoming this specific issue. And, personally, I'm just glad you're here to talk about this, because from a guy's perspective, getting aroused through the ears doesn't even seem, what, really, huh? They might listen to music that has horribly degrading lyrics to women. They're not typically aroused by that. But I had read a book recently on the woman's brain, and the author is a female neurologist, and she explained that there's actually sounds that a woman's brain can hear and detect that are completely imperceptible to the male brain. Different nuances and inflections in the human voice that the man's brain is literally deaf to. I think there's entire paragraphs that we are deaf to, not just sounds, but I think there's so much more that a woman's brain is absorbing, and the way that it's connected to her body, her sensuality. This needs a feminine response. So audio porn, what would you say?
Yeah, I'm going to have to read that book. I was just telling my husband that a smell gave me a headache, and he did not believe me. I had to research this for him to show him that it was true. No, and that I actually think what she's speaking to speaks to how difficult this is for women in general, because, they say the female brain, the male brain, women aren't necessarily as visual. And so many women can be addicted to masturbation without an addiction to pornography. It's pretty crazy. Whereas usually that's not the case for men. One kind of coincides with the other. And so it's audio, it's visual, but it's also, books, written pornography for women is the number one version of pornography for women. I think, thank you, 50 Shades of Grey, for kind of opening that to not just, the romance novels in the back of the store, but the New York's bestseller type situation that women now think it's completely fine because it's allowed publicly. And so yeah, there's a lot of things. And so similar to what we're sharing here about connection and finding positive ways to not just remove what's harmful, but to actually add in things that are good, beautiful, and true. I think that's really important what we're talking about here. When we're saying, okay, get away from pornography, remove yourself from all these bad visual or books and stuff, it doesn't mean now you just sit alone in a dark room, right? Like there are beautiful and good and true things that you can start filling your minds with. And so I had a friend that wasn't even addicted to pornography or masturbation, but she just really desired a relationship. She just desperately wanted to be dating someone, to be romantically pursued. And it was all consuming. It was kind of an obsessive, thought. And I started asking her, and she's like, I've stopped watching chick flicks. I've gotten those out of my mind. And what we realized was that she was listening to almost straight country music, all these like romance songs that was still. And so even though she thought she was doing everything she could to cut it out, there was still this one piece. And so I would say not only removing the audio pornography, but any type of audio or sensory type content that could be triggering to all of these things. And so the over-sexualized songs, and it's not going to be easy. Many songs are about this. But there are good and beautiful songs. There are good and beautiful things to fill your life with, media and otherwise. And I would assume when I talk to anyone who's trying to rid pornography from their life, they first get rid of the X-rated content, right? The pornographic websites, they do that. But then they're still on the streaming devices, the primetime television, which for women, you see a couple aggressively making out and then closing a door, and our imaginations can fill in the dots, like fill in the blank, whatever. And we can carry on that fantasy with just the female brain just does that. I mean, I joke around how I played Barbies until far too old. And it just our desire for imagination and storytelling, that's all a part of it. And so really learning that it might seem embarrassing at first, but remove all over-sexualized content from your life. And that's where you're going to start to see the biggest difference. So,
It's funny, as you're speaking, I remember a friend of mine used to be in the United States Marine Corps, and one day he was at the base, and he noticed there's just a ton of porn on the bookshelves for the troops to watch. And, one weekend they had a break from the base and guys could go do whatever. So a bunch of guys went from Camp Pendleton down to Tijuana to go clubbing, and he decided to hang back. And so he stayed there and he went over to the bookshelf where all the porn was. Now, this was before it was live streaming or DVD or whatever, and they had the VHS cassettes of porn. So he was a bit of a technician. So he took a screwdriver and he unscrewed the VHS cassettes and pulled out the pornographic footage, and then he put in there footage of other movies. He actually inserted the footage of VeggieTales. What he was doing with the VeggieTales VHS at the Marine base, I'm not certain, but he put that in there. He actually put in the contents of Jesus of Nazareth, which is a 6-hour movie. And then he put back all the pornographic casings, put it up on the bookshelf. So Saturday night, the boys roll home and they're like, hey, let's watch some porn. And they pop it in and they're like, what? Why are there cucumbers dancing and singing? And so they took it out and then they put another one in, and it was the Jesus of Nazareth. Now, he hadn't rewound it all the way, so it was kind of halfway through, and they're like, oh, okay, this is a real movie. We haven't seen this one yet. And they're all sitting down, they're waiting, and they're like, well, maybe we just have to be patient. Maybe this porn has a plot, And they ended up watching the entire movie, and he got in big trouble for it. But you know what they said? The plot thing. I think for the guys, it's like, let's get through the plot to the action, whereas I think so often for the woman, the plot is half of the action, the storyline, the deeper message, the adventure of being wanted and pursued and all this stuff. And, it's sometimes been said that, what arouses a guy is, one word, Playboy, with 50,000 pictures, whereas with the girl, it's one word, 50 Shades of Grey or Fabio with, not with one picture on the cover, but then 50,000 words inside. So it's maybe not the image that she's going after. It might be something else, that deeper storyline. So, I would pose the question to you, just straight up, like, are chick flicks emotional porn? What would you say?
In some regards, they're physical porn. It depends on the chick flick you're talking about. I think there's a lot of case for that. There's certainly objectification. I remember I was watching, I couldn't even tell you the movie, normal chick movie. Guy comes out with his shirt off. All the girls just hoot and holler, the theater uproars. I'm like, if that was a woman in a bathing suit and all the guys started making call-out noise, we would be pissed. We would just be slapping the guys and just so upset and offended. And yet women have just allowed themselves in the world, like, we can get a pass. We're just allowed to objectify men, and that's completely okay. And it's appalling. I mean, seeing how many movies and shows just have the random shirt off scene for no reason. He has no reason to have his shirt off. It's just crazy. And I think, what you're speaking to, the plot and the story, and if women are sitting there like, no, that's not true. I mean, if you've ever had a crush on a male celebrity or think he's attractive, how many of you have Googled or researched maybe his favorite ice cream or where his hometown is? You kind of want a backstory. And it's fascinating. You talk to girls about this, and they all kind of sheepishly like, oh, shoot, yeah, like slowly I've collected information about this actor or whatever. And you don't know them. You've completely emotionally, emotional integrity. Sarah Swafford goes through this. You've built up a false relationship in your brain, and chick flicks very much lend themselves to that. I'm not one of those people that thinks you need to remove chick flicks from your life to be pure or to seek freedom. I think there are healthy ways, and depending on the movie, there are decent movies that have, deep, good, meaningful messages of family and connection and pursual. A man pursuing a woman is actually something desirable and that we as man and woman should be seeking and looking for. But it's the ones that sneak in. I always throw out The Notebook. It's kind of getting dated now, but you look at The Notebook, and one, there's a very sexually graphic scene that anyone who's seen it can recall. But you also look at a storyline where there's a woman who's engaged to another man who then has sex with someone else. And yet we desire and root for that affair. We want that couple because that's the couple the whole love story is about. And you sit there and you think about what the actual plot is and the relationship you're rooting for. And that at the end of the movie, I mean, the guy has Alzheimer's, so you're crying. You're like, this is so beautiful, the love. And you sit back and go, that love was founded on a cheating affair that has no place in real love. And so if you really break down the content that the world is selling us, it is manipulating us to be falling for these false ideas. I mean, don't even get me started on the whole the bad boy mentality who then turns good for the woman. I mean, it's sickening because it's teaching and training women to desire qualities that are not attractive and not desirable long term. And so I would say pornography, yes, but in any case, it's harmful depending on the chick flick, depending on the content that the woman's consuming, and depending on her struggle. Some chick flicks for some women can be very triggering in these addictions, and they should be removed. So I think it depends on which one and what your struggle is specifically. But yeah, it's crazy.
I appreciate you saying that about the redeeming the bad boy kind of thing, because in 20 years of traveling and speaking, all these girls come up and, they're doing the missionary dating thing of, he's got issues and, I know he's made some mistakes and he's on parole and whatever, but, I'm going to change him. And, someone always does change in those relationships, but it's not the guy for the better. It's always the girl for the worse. And so I think when women get wrapped up in these plots, they almost try to hope to live them out in a sense. And I think that the woman's desire, as you're saying, for the celebrity, the background information, the details, all this stuff, that's a good thing. I mean, that's part of the feminine genius of the integration of woman. Like, she just doesn't want bodies. She wants a person. She wants the emotions, the story, to know the human being, and all of that is good. And so I think what the devil's going to want to do is just get in there and use the woman's strengths against her in a certain sense, where now she's emotionally stalking some guy on social media, whether he's a celebrity or a guy down the hall in the dorm, just emotionally. It's not just about physically getting too far. Emotionally, we get ahead of ourselves as well, I think. So a third question. Yeah, go on ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, and I think the pornography industry has discovered this. And that's why, maybe 20 years ago, pornographic material wasn't as enticing for women, and they are now just pumping out material that is much more attractive to women. I think Netflix had another film, 365 Days, and it's a story about a man who kidnaps a woman and basically gives her a year to fall in love with him, and during this year sexually abuses her essentially, but forces himself on her. And I'm fairly confident the whole desire of this movie is, do you want them together? But you realize what he does in this movie. Again, so they're getting really good at learning how to specifically target women and what women are desiring and wanting to like you said, recreate in their own life.
No, I was reading a book recently in terms of helping guys break free from porn, and the author mentioned how like the porn industry is creating more violent pornography against women, because there's a demand for that. There's guys that are not just seeking to find intimacy in porn, they're seeking vengeance, they're seeking control, they're seeking domination of women, and porn gives them a sense of that, just like it gives them a sense of being desired. Oh, she wants me. She doesn't know who you are. She does not want you. They're paid to make themselves look like they want you. But, the porn industries are going after our weaknesses, and some women even desire to be hurt, desire to be controlled, desire to be dominated, submitted, used, because there's a wound there, and they're living out of the wound, and the porn industry is sexualizing their brokenness. And so they're going back to this because it's who they think they are. I am the damaged goods. I am the used. I am the one, that needs to be controlled. And it's infecting the wounds, what's going on here. But I think if we can understand the ache, where's this coming from? Where's the root? Where is the wellspring of this desire coming out? There's some very legitimate unmet need or some very real wound that is gaping open wide. And that's kind of a portal of entry for so much of this stuff, our own brokenness, our own woundedness. And that's why the human intimacy, the accountability can just humanize us again, of just like, well, wait a minute, I'm more than my brokenness. Yeah, I'm messed up. Yeah, I've got this messed up fetish or this fantasy or this addiction or this or that, but I'm not those things. I'm a lot more than that. I'm a daughter of the King of Heaven. I'm a son of God. That's who I am at my core. I'm not the sexually abused girl who's now in college who never dealt with it. I'm not the porn addict who's been in the hiding but leading the youth group for 5 years. I'm more than these labels. I'm more than my brokenness. And until a person can realize their identity in Christ, a lot of times they identify, I think, with their woundedness and brokenness.
Mm-hmm. And I think when you look at the extremes of these things, like, people who are out there and you're still talking about, I think it's 80% of pornography has violence in it, and 98% of that violence is directed towards the women. And people will hear that and they'll be appalled. But then you'll talk to another woman who's like, yeah, that's the kind I've gravitated towards after, a porn addiction just increased to the point where then normal stuff wasn't getting me there. So I started using this more violent pornography. And then now it's to the point, and she's in a relationship where she can't, experience pleasure, and she's married, unless there's violence. I mean, this is distortion. And when you hear it in the extreme, you're thinking, well, that's crazy. At least what I'm doing is okay, but that's crazy. But people don't see that they're very closely linked. And I think rape culture, when people are like, oh, pornography's fine, but rape, that's bad. Well, pornography has rape in the pornography, where these men and women become addicted to this fantasy, and then it needs to be played out in their own life. And it's appalling. And this woundedness that you're speaking to, that's exactly what we need to be seeking to fulfill, that none of this has a place in our life.
And I think at the deepest core, there's something so good there that's being desired. I mean, you look at Paul's language in the book of Ephesians, where, husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. Wives, submit to your husbands. And people are, oh, that's sexist, biblical, whatever. Paul doesn't really mean that, or Paul's a sexist or whatever. But, maybe there's a divine design here. Not of a woman submitting because she's inferior, but I remember as Christopher West talking about the Latin, to submissio means to be under the mission of the husband. What is the mission of the husband is the cross, to give himself for love of his bride that she might be holy. Well, that's a mission I think a woman would agree to be underneath, by his side. And Paul talks about mutual submission as well, but there's a healthy submission that we're created for, not to be lorded over and dominated and controlled, but to be served with the love of Christ. And I think at the very core, that's what we're going after, but the devil's kind of pornified this holy urge within us. And so I think before we write off all our urges as just straight from the pit of hell, I think there's a good, that the Patreon person asking the question, was tapping into, that there's a good there, not just a physical good, but there's an emotional good, there's a spiritual good, there's something I'm pursuing. So it's not all evil. There's some good that needs to be redeemed in the midst of it. We just got to kind of dig through the rubble to find out what our hearts really ache for.
Amen.
But next question she sent in, what advice, Kelsey, do you have for someone who has struggled with sexual addiction when they experience temptation and sexual desire? Sexual desire is natural, but oftentimes it brings up an image, video, or audio of something you've seen before. It's frustrating because it's a natural part of life, but I feel like I'm majorly sinning every time I have a sexual desire. Thanks.
Yes. First off, obviously, you are not majorly sinning every time you have a sexual desire. Would be the first thing. I think, yeah, there's a difference between something popping into your mind and letting that play out, that fantasy, whether it's acting it out physically or even just fantasizing in your mind and letting it carry out mentally. And so when an image, a memory of something pops into your mind, praying right then and there and asking Jesus, please take this away from me. I even had, a counselor, he was saying a very important thing. He was also a trained spiritual director, said, before those things pop into your mind, you can go into a holy hour, go in front of him in adoration and just say, Jesus, have a memory flash. He's like, don't dwell on it. And then just say, Jesus, I do not desire this memory. Please take it from me. And actively praying through some of these memories and some of these images that we might have, and asking Jesus to take them away. And it has to be an honest, a deep desire. It's not like, Jesus, take it, but actually, can I keep it for later on next week when I'm struggling? You need to truly desire this to be gone and start praying through. But having one come into your mind is not a sin. And it is human. It is natural. You could have a thought of, it doesn't have to be pornography. It could just be like you have a wave of anger and you're like, oh, that makes me mad. But then you go, but I forgive them. And right, that you have not acted out the sin of anger. You've had a thought, an emotion, a moment, and that is very healthy. And I think it's those thoughts and those temptations that really allow virtue to come forth. We were talking about our bodies as a way of sanctification. I mean, these temptations can be great opportunities for us to put into practice the will and the intellect of what God gave us, of, okay, I'm not going to choose this. I'm going to choose what I know is good for me and good for the other. And I'm going to choose to put this away. And that's when let's say it's late at night and you're in your room and this memory comes by. It might be getting up out of bed, going and getting a drink of water, getting out your rosary, reading a book, getting your mind off of it. It might require that, especially the first few times. So you can get into the habit of removing it instantly from your mind without maybe some of those other means. But finding healthy ways to distract yourself, get your brain on a different track, if you will, can all be really helpful ways to really build that virtue that we need in all areas of our life. So
one thing I'll throw in that I've at least found to be helpful in my own life is that attraction sparks a desire for union. That's totally natural. It's just that longing to be united to that person. And, when we have like a shame-based idea of like, hey, I had a desire, I'm sinning, there's this unnecessary tension in us because we should respond to the human body in love. And so that flashback is an invitation to love. And so, well, how do I love a flashback of my ex-boyfriend? How do I love a flashback of some pornographic pop-up ad or movie I saw 2 years ago? Well, I would say bring that actor or actress to God and say, God, this man is specifically on my mind right now. He's a son of yours. He's a child of yours. I don't know where he's at in life right now. Maybe he's still in the porn industry. Maybe he's doing whatever. I don't know. But God, I'm just going to offer up this, like you said, rosary for him. I'm going to respond to the very thought of him by personalizing him. John Paul II, in his book, Love and Responsibility, talked about chastity being the quickness of the will to affirm the person's personal value. And so their sensual value comes at us. And, the thought is, just to deflect. But like, what if we okay, yep, there's a sexual value there and there's a good sexual value, but where's that personal value? And now let me lean in towards that and love this person. Let me fast for this person. Let me, atone for the times I've used them in my imagination or with my own body by using my body to pray for them with fasting or pulling out the rosary or doing whatever. And so that way you're actually, in a very pure and beautiful sense, uniting yourself with this person. And God will bestow graces upon that individual that they will only become aware of in heaven. At that point, they will see how much you interceded for them. And imagine if you get bombarded with temptations 20 times a day and you keep turning into 20 more Hail Marys for that guy or whatever, and that grace applies to him and he starts living it out or has a conversion down the road, and then imagine the unity that the two of you will have in heaven for all eternity. as a brother and sister in Christ, that you are pouring upon him intercessory graces and penances and fasting or whatever, and the union of love that you two will have as you stand with your glorified bodies before the beatific vision of heaven is so much greater than any bogus intimacy that the porn culture had ever promised you on earth. And so maybe God does want to fulfill your desires for unity, but just in a much more beautiful way. And so temptations, like Kelsey said, it's going to come. A priest told me there's a difference between having a bird fly over your head and letting it make a nest in your hair. So plenty of those things are going to fly by. But, I read one saying, he said, don't be disturbed by that. You don't want to lose it was Father Jacques Philippe said, like, one of the most important rules in spiritual warfare is not to lose your peace, even during times of a fall. And so sometimes when we fall and we're overly distraught about it, it's a sign of pride, of self-reliance, of, I can't believe I sinned. Why? Well, don't lose your peace. Even in the midst of feeling disappointed in yourself and frustrated, like, it's been 2 years, I'm still wrestling with this. The Holy Spirit's going to give you a peace in that of like, but God's with you in the battle. He's with you in the struggle. He loves you, and he'll complete the good work in you. So it's okay to feel that restlessness, but the scrupulosity, self-hatred, self-loathing, discouragement, that's the evil spirit. It's not the Holy Spirit. But, let's say, Kelsey, someone's been wrestling with this and kind of putting it off, and like you had mentioned, kind of retaining an affection for that sin, almost like it's like an old companion that's been with them through some pretty dark times, and to cut it off is like severing an old friendship. There's a bond there that's been created, someone I've turned to when times have gotten lonely. How can this habitual falling into this false companionship derail not just a person's dating relationships, but derail their vocation if they don't sever and renounce this fondness that they've created in their heart for sin?
Yeah, I remember after one of my talks, I had a woman come up to me and she was in tears, just so vulnerably sharing with me that she had been working for almost 5 years, tried everything in the book to rid herself of this. And then, she composed herself and was like, I've done everything, basically. Like, what else can I do? And I asked her that very simple question, like, do you actually desire freedom from this? And she looked at me like, well, of course I do. I've done X, Y, Z. Here's my list. And I was just like, no, but do you actually desire freedom? Can you say tomorrow that this wasn't an option for you, that you would be okay, that for the rest of your life, no matter what came up, you lose your job, there's a death in the family, whatever, you do not have this anymore as a crutch? And you just saw her face and it just went blank. And I was like, do you trust that Jesus can actually fulfill you in all of those ways and not this? And it is a very scary thought to someone who has been using this as a crutch, a way to any type of insecurity, any type of emotional depression or despair. This can be a crutch and a way to escape it. And if you don't have that, and then that can be a huge obstacle to truly seeking freedom in these things. And so I think all of that to say, you're looking at that, kind of what you were saying, the vocation aspect. What are we looking ahead towards? What is some of the hope set before us that can guide us in the right way? Vocationally, this harms men and women in many different ways. We were talking about those studies earlier. Every secular and religious study is saying the same thing, that this is going to harm your physical experience of sex today and moving forward. So I don't even have the gamut of studies on hand, but, a man's ability to perform sexually is hindered. Women's ability to climax is completely hindered. And so if you think about that, your desire to be united in marriage, an addiction to pornography could be very debilitating in that area. If you're looking at emotional connections, it severs that ability. There's men and women in studies that are showing that the brain actually changes. The more exposure you have to pornography and masturbation, the more false amounts of chemicals, dopamine and oxytocin, are poured around your brain. And oxytocin is the relationship establishing, like, bonding chemical. And you're bonding yourself to a screen, right? To whatever you're watching pornography on. And so you actually begin to have an excitement, like your heart rate will increase, your whole body chemistry will change. at the turning on of a computer screen. Like they actually have studies that show the whatever sound that your computer makes, maybe it's a humming sound from the fan, maybe it's a little beep, whatever, that your body will actually get excited about that sound because you're actually creating an emotional connection, a relational connection to your screen, to your phone, whatever it is. And when we hear that, we're like, what? That's not okay. They showed that there's an app creator who left the app creating business, and now he does an anti-technology speaking on like TED Talks and what. And he said that the color in your phone is identical to that of casinos. The red is that addictive, that they actually have made it so that the colors on your screen. And so I even have it where there's like a way to turn it black and white. You can't see that black and white screen. But different things like that to like keep yourself not addicted to these things. And the reason why we want to protect ourselves is whenever you talk to women too, and you talk about your future life, whether it's religious life and you're going to be hopefully married to Jesus Christ, the greatest spouse in the world, or you're married in holy matrimony on this earth, I hope that you have the desire that this man is who I'm going to be with of my life, and we're going to love and care for each other. We're going to provide for each other. He's going to sacrifice for me. I'm going to sacrifice for him. We're going to lay our lives down for each other. We're going to be partners and raise our children together in this world. And there's just this aching in our hearts. And you start to speak to a woman, and if you're listening, like, and they're like, yes, that's what I desire. Everything else is going to directly hurt that. Any distortion of love. And I think in dating, if you were to look at dating as a precursor for this, let's say you're trying to date a guy, but you have these addictions on the side, you actually are attracted to a different type of man. They have brain chemistry that shows you're actually attracted to a more aggressive man, probably due to the nature of the violence found. But statistically speaking, you are attracted to a more violent guy. So let's say you have that while you're dating, and you start to seek healing and you get married. You actually might not be as attracted to your spouse anymore. I could go into the chemicals of that. And same for men and maybe what they're attracted to leading into that. So I could go on, and I don't want to just continue to hit that way, but all of these things are not going to aid in you pursuing your final vocation of marriage and potentially religious life. If anything, they're just going to derail it completely and keep you from where God is calling you to be. So,
And I think that the good news, the kind of the silver lining, is that the neuroplasticity of the brain, as scary as it can be, can also be bent back, in the right direction. You're talking about the sound of that computer going on and your brain kind of lighting up. I remember in college taking some psychology courses, and, Pavlov's dog, the trained response where he kind of rings the bell, feeds the dog, rings the bell, feeds the dog. And eventually all he's got to do is ring that bell and the dog starts to salivate. This is the trained response we can do with our brains. And I had once read that the kind of the pleasure center of your brain, your medial preoptic nucleus, this is the part of the brain that gets trained so easily. So if you're a heroin addict, that's the pleasure, the rewards part of the brain. And so when we kind of associate sexual pleasure, if you're masturbating, to porn with dirty, illicit, forbidden sexual fantasies, you're actually training your brain that what is arousing is what I'm doing. And so it's not so much that our behavior follows our desires also follow our behavior. And so if we're behaving in this way, we're bending our brain in that direction. But I'd seen once that they did an autopsy of a concert violinist after they had passed away, and found out on a neurological level that the part of the brain that was associated with the fine motor skills, of their hand was physically larger than normal cadavers, because their brain had actually grown because of how much practice had been done there in that specific area. But like I said, the beautiful thing is the neuroplasticity of it. We can bend these things back if they've been bent kind of in the wrong direction. It just kind of takes time and effort depending on how long and the severity of type of porn that we've, marinated ourselves into. And so sometimes counseling can be a huge help, and there's lots of resources out there for that. I'm sure you've got them on your resource page at the website there, some counselors or different accountability programs and healing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Different healing retreats and programs.
what would you say to someone, just last couple questions before we wrap up, turning into a relational level? Let's say you're struggling with this as a woman and your boyfriend doesn't know, or your fiance does not know. How do you kind of break the news to him? Or, you're just in the beginning stages of dating. Like, at what point do you kind of bring this up, having, a latte over Starbucks? Oh, by the way, I've been wrestling in this particular, when and how?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say, hopefully, if you are pursuing a relationship and discerning marriage, there's most likely at the beginning of a relationship going to be some type of boundary conversation of chastity, of, hey, how far is too far physically, right, in this relationship? And that's usually where I would recommend to have a very, very high level introduction to the topic of pornography. I don't think that this is where you bare your soul, or you ask a lot of questions about their personal experience in these areas, because statistically, men, it's like something like 95 or above % of men, at least have experienced this, whether it's current or previous, and it's getting higher and higher for women. And so I would say, just saying, hey, we've talked about physical chastity and things like that. I also know that pornography and masturbation are huge struggles for men and women in our world. And I want to make sure that when we're talking about all of these areas of chastity as we pursue this relationship, I just want to see, like, do you have accountability in all these areas, so that as we continue to pursue our relationship and dating, you have another man in your life, mentor or whatever, that you can be turning to for any area in our relationship that could come up, and say, I have an accountability partner in all these areas as well. Just as an initial, and the reason why I always say bringing it up is it should be communicated that an expectation for you in your relationship is that pornography is not a part of it. I think I've had many women who, are at that engagement stage, whether they are engaged or about to be, and it comes up that their significant other has this huge addiction, or maybe they're like, wow, this is a huge addiction. And I've even heard the argument, well, hey, you never said anything like that this wasn't okay. Or maybe, they've had really bad formation and haven't been really taught the reasons why it's problematic or harmful. Instead, they've been fed the lies that the world tells them, that this is manly, or as a woman, like, this is empowering. And so to have just an initial conversation, to be on the same page, we agree this is not good. Do you have places to go to help you in these areas? And then I would say, as the relationship gets more serious, even towards engagement, would be, and I would say, talking with a spiritual director and a mentor to really navigate your specific situation, how long your struggle has been, where you're at in your relationship. I mean, if you're a freshman in college and you don't plan to get engaged until, for a few years, versus you're almost there, I mean, could very much change how much you share. For me, I chose to wait until I was engaged before I gave my pretty much the full backstory. And I did that because, for me, my story and my struggle is very personal. It's me and the Lord. It's like, that's who up until that point, I wasn't married. And so that was who I was committed to, was Jesus. And so I didn't want a whole bunch of guys that I was dating to really know my full story. I wanted that to be saved for the one who was going to be my spouse. I wanted it to be protected, like he was going to protect that information for me. And so he had known a little bit. I mean, it did help that I was speaking about this. So he knew that this obviously was a part of my story. But I would say, depending on the level of your relationship and the level of your addiction, kind of taking time to share that with him when the time is right. Don't just date one, here's my whole story, here's my whole heart on a platter. Tell me everything that you've been struggling in. And then, within the relationship and dating, this always comes up. This is why you also want an accountability partner that is of the same sex. You don't actually want your accountability partner to be your significant other or your spouse. This can be very harmful in the relationship. I mean, this sin is not just a personal sin. No matter what you yourself or no matter what someone else tells you, you are always hurting another person, whether you're single or not. And so making sure you have an accountability partner who isn't personally affected by you falling into this can be really helpful to navigate some of those more sensitive areas. So making sure that they have that accountability and you do as well to help in that area would be all things I would share as well.
It's good stuff. So we'll close with this. I'll drop a bomb on you. I'm going to give you three scenarios. There's a girl and she's dating a guy, and he looks at porn and he doesn't think it's that much of a problem. He's not actually doing it. He's not that bad of a guy. That's scenario number one. What does the girl do? Scenario number two, she's dating a guy and he knows it's a problem and he's working on it, but he keeps falling back into this stuff. How does she know? Is this worth hanging on to? And then lastly, you're a wife and you find your husband's porn. So those three scenarios. Number one, the guy's, you're dating him and he doesn't think porn's much of a problem. Second one, he knows it's a problem, but he keeps falling into it. What do you do there? And then third one, you find your husband's porn. So what does a woman do depending on which scenario she lands in?
Yeah, really starting with the softball questions to come to this.
Oh, yeah.
So the first scenario, it's cut and dry, dump him. It's hard because most often you might have a lot of emotional attachment. Most likely you feel like you're in love. Otherwise you wouldn't even be asking this question. You would just have broken up and moved on. And so it's clear if they don't think it's an issue, they will need to be convinced of that, not through you, that that's the case. And one of the best ways you can prove to them this is an issue, so much so that I won't date someone with it, that can send a much clearer message than no matter how many conversations you have. And I don't break up with them with the intention of I'm going to break up with them so then they realize it and then we'll get back together. Because again, that's not the case. You break up with them with the intent of I'm going to pray for this person. I'm going to pray that they become the man that the Lord is calling them to be, the man I know the Lord is calling them to be. And if one day that happens, great. Maybe that means we will come back together, not necessarily romantically, but we will run into each other again. Maybe not, but surrender that relationship, that man, to Jesus, and then continue to pursue the things God is calling you to do. And I guarantee you will feel immensely better about yourself and about who God has called you to be as his daughter if that happens. So first situation, you would dump him. Second one is a little bit more difficult. If he's struggling with this and keeps falling into it, I think it's going to depend on what type of accountability measures he has. If it's like, I know I shouldn't be doing this, so I'm not going to do it anymore, but then I continually fall. Or is it someone who has gone through Exodus 90, has a men's purity group on his campus or high school, is actively seeking resources, and you're actually seeing a change between falls. So no longer is it every day or every week. It's now every couple months, maybe every 6 months. You want to see the falls happen fewer and further between, to start to demonstrate that there is significant growth happening. If it continues to be a problem, it probably does require you to break up with him. Not in the name of you're bad, you like porn, I'm breaking up with you, but in a gift of love. I love you so much, or I care about you so much, that I want to give you the greatest opportunity to find healing in this. And the greatest opportunity for you to find healing from this is to be surrounded by good, wholesome men who can build you up in this community. And dating, if done right, requires a lot of time. It requires a lot of communication. It requires a lot of self-gift. And it might be necessary for him to be putting all of that energy towards overcoming these addictions and going into retreats or in and outpatient programs or whatever he might need, and in caring for him to allow him to go and do that could be a beautiful thing for you to do for him. So the middle one's kind of gray. You might break up, you might not. It just depends on where he's at and in his healing journey and how you guys can come together through that. As for the third question, the third situation, married. If you are married and you find out your spouse has a pornography addiction, or porn problem, this is also going to depend on how he experiences it. If he doesn't think porn's an issue, he's like, I'm not going to stop. This is going to keep happening. This is just who I am and I don't care. I do think going to marriage counseling and having him go to groups and talks where they can maybe share how harmful this is and do that for a while. I mean, do that and have, again, all of this, you should be having mentors speaking into your specific situation, more than just me telling you, this is what you should do. Have mentors, have spiritual directors, have spiritual fathers and sisters speaking into your situation. But after some time, if he still isn't willing to change his stance. There are situations in which it does warrant, in a way he's saying, I'm cheating on you and I don't care, and I'm going to keep cheating on you. And actually what that means is that his vows to you, saying that he will be exclusively yours and be completely committed to you, was a lie. And so it's actually invalid. His vows weren't true. And so you go through all of those things with the church and what that means. So that would be one, hopefully the road that you don't have to take. And that's a much more difficult road, in having to be separated in that situation. But most often the hopeful road would be he's coming to you with this addiction. It's not something he wants to have, but it is something that's a part of his past. He doesn't know where to turn. And it can be a very, very heavy cross as a wife, as a spouse, because it could take years of him seeking healing. And it could be that situation where I mentioned in the second relationship where he has a lot of work to do, but you're married and you don't have the option of breaking it off. That's not what you've called to in your vows. And if he truly wants to work on this, to seek counseling and have, one, you need a community to share with other women of how you're feeling in this. It doesn't mean that you're just going to be alone and you have to suffer through this. Have a community and have some women to share this burden with. But yeah, to walk with your spouse in this road of healing is quite difficult. And I work with several women who that's the case. But it also is a journey that is redemptive in the idea that we are all sinners and we all have something that we truly desire to be free of, and to continue to lift that up and to be fasting for him, as you shared, and to be praying for his sanctification and yours in that marriage. So that is the harder situation, though, that you gave.
Yeah, no, it's the hardest. I know women that have been in this situation. They've been married for 15 years. They got 5 kids. And it's like, okay, how big of a fuss do I make over this? Because if I, really, kick the guy to the curb, then, I'm going to be living in an apartment as a single mom, and who knows what damage that's going to have to the kids and this and that. So I'll just kind of put up with it and bite my lip and, and settle for this marriage that's just a dumpster fire, and so I think that's why it's so key. Like you said, she's got to be able to talk to people about this and not feel like she's got to hide her partner's shame and that's somehow heroic. Like, no, go to counseling. Even if he won't go, you go. You find a good counselor so you can bounce this stuff off of them, and, and then they can help you, and you can find a good Catholic counselor, talk to your pastor. Like, are there grounds for an annulment here? Like, is this separation type of material, or how do I get him realizing that it's not unmanly to go to counseling with your wife? It's not unmanly to fight for your marriage. And, this is tremendous source of suffering for women, in all different situations, whether it's a boyfriend, fiance, husband, but again, to get back to the key of intimacy, and not just with guys, but with other women.
Yes. And as you were sharing with counseling, Integrity Restored has a great suggestion. If you're a man or a woman and this is something that you're addicted with and you're about to share with your spouse for the first time, and like you said, it could be an 18-year marriage, it could be a 1-year marriage, wherever it is, that you actually, the first time you share with them is if you're going to a counselor, you invite your spouse with you to a session with your counselor, and you share the news with them in front of this counselor. And the reason that Integrity Restored and a lot of other incredibly smart people suggest this is because this is such a sensitive issue and it can destroy hearts and marriages. They want the spouse to have a connection to someone else, so the counselor, who then knows your spouse and who you can talk to about the situation without detraction. Because I think if a husband is sharing this with his wife, the wife then might be afraid to share with her girlfriends because they know his husband or his friend, and there's a whole circle, right, of wives who know everything. But you have a counselor then who knows both of you and who you can go to in turn, and vice versa. If you're a woman who has this addiction, take your husband to the counselor with you so you can share that with him in a safe place. And they can maybe mediate some of those conversations. So that also is a tip I would give if this is something that you really need to share with your spouse. Either one, to do it with a trained professional can be a really helpful way for the other to receive the information. So,
and so if you find yourself in that situation, or maybe your boyfriend, whatever, doesn't struggle, maybe you're struggling with it, you're looking for community, you're looking for support, I, again, want to encourage you to get Kelsey's book, Uncompromising Purity. One of the things in here is that there's a study guide questions for every single chapter. You can get this, not super long, at chastity.com, and they're only $3 a piece to get these things in bulk. Get them. Share them with the girls at your youth group, your dorm. Form community, because so much of this, when you have real intimacy, not just with another guy or a screen, but intimacy just with other women, just of into me see, this is what's going on in my life. Sometimes when that need is being met, the other temptations become so much more manageable. Temptations aren't going to disappear, but they become a lot easier to slay if you've got that sisterhood, which is something you can create on your own by getting the thing. And so you get that at chastity.com. A couple other things, just reminders, the Hallow app. Do not forget to try this thing for free. You just go to Hallow, which is HALLOW/Lust is Boring, the name of our podcast, and you can try that out for 14 days for free. There's a link to it in the show notes. We'll also be putting a link to where you can get Kelsey Skoch's book, and then also the new ebook that we just released today, which is just for girls, on the top 10 guys to avoid. It's basically 10 guys you are better off without. And so, one of those is the guy who's into all this stuff, and it talks about how to avoid him before that relationship even begins to unfold. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, Lust is Boring. It's on iTunes, Spotify, Google, all that. And then also, if you want to support the program, please click the link below for Patreon. It's just patreon.com/Jason Evert. You may see the new lighting, the new mics, the new sounds. That's all because of our patrons. And now what we're going to do is, now that we got that in place, we're going to get video editors that are going to now chop up all these podcasts, put them into little episodes, throw them up on YouTube, and we can reach so many more people with the good news of God's plan for human sexuality. And so maybe you're not the motivational speaker, maybe you're not the author, but any support that we get from our supporters on Patreon, you directly allow us to reach literally hundreds of thousands of more people than we ever would otherwise. And so, again, Kelsey, I cannot thank you enough, not just for coming on the show today, but just for the courage and the love to just step forward and say, hey, girls, you are not alone. Let me show you. And so thank you for leading the women in this life and ultimately in the life to come.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jason. This was always fun. So
awesome. Well, God bless you. Keep up the awesome work, and we will keep you and your family in prayers. But I know you got a couple little ones taking a nap at home, so I'll let you get back to them. So God bless, Kelsey.
All right. God bless.
Thank you.